Hey, this is Michael Lindsay. I'm out here testing the 2019 Husqvarna FC450 Rockstar Edition at Fox Raceway. So as we know, this is the second year that Husqvarna has had a Rockstar Edition. Last year, it kind of just debuted without a lot of parts on it because it was showing off a new generation of bike. If you got one, you were basically getting the next year's model 6 months in advance because we had a new cylinder head, exhaust system, frame, all the bodywork, seat, fuel tank, etc. It's kind of their launching point into a new platform for the next few years. Now that we're a year into that, this version, to kind of make it worth its extra coin, has a lot more billet parts on it, or a lot more goodies per se. We've actually got a full power parts from Husqvarna wheel set on the bike with a billet and ice hub, triple clamps there, power parts unit with splits upper and lower clamping surface areas, FMF 4.1 exhaust slip-on system because that's what the Rockstar team uses. Got seat cover, pro taper bars, and a few other goodies throughout the motorcycle. So what does it do different than the standard 2019 FC450? That bike is extremely smooth, very easy to ride, very precise chassis, but I felt like there's still some improvements that could be made to both the engine characteristic and the suspension settings. For this, they have tried both of those. Starting with the suspension, you'll see it says Zact on it. That isn't a new equipment per se, it's just a rebranding of the motocross product for WP. It still has an AER48 air fork at the front with a setting change that includes a new piston and a change to the initial part of the shim stack on the compression side. One of the biggest changes is the actual initial shims have been dimpled, as they say, and they're trying to get them to flex a little bit easier. Since they went to this updated chassis, I felt like they've lost a little bit of the initial comfort of the bike, some of that flex that the chassis naturally gave. So you notice a little bit more of the feeling from the fork, that it felt topped out, like it took a lot of tension to break the crust or initial compression of the fork. By doing these changes, they've been able to get that to basically just move a little bit easier. When you hit bumps, you don't feel like the fork has to push through a step to get moving. It just floats a little bit easier through the stroke and definitely adds some comfort and feedback to the rider. It allows you to feel where the front end is a little more accurately. Even from there though, with the chain suspension, because of my weight, I'm around 160 pounds, I opted to go softer to try to get the bike settled down a little more. It was fairly well balanced in the morning at the standard 105. I felt like it could be a little bit lower in the rear, but I actually started with the fork changes because you can do them by hand. Went 3 to 4 clicks softer on the fork to get it moving a little bit easier through the stroke for my weight. But with that, I unbalanced the bike. So I went back, took a quarter turn out of the high speed in the shock, and also opened up the low speed compression a little bit to bring the bike down. Really positive with this bike is how precise the chassis is, and when it's well balanced, it's really easy to huck this bike into bad situations. It really responds well to that, and it kind of gives me a lot of confidence to override it. Another reason you gain a lot of confidence to override is the engine characteristic. It's a little bit of a plus and a minus, but it's really mellow, it's very linear and very broad. It doesn't come on anywhere very exciting, but because of that, you can kind of hammer the bike in a lot of situations because it doesn't try to get away from you. Map 1 has definitely got a bit of a delay initially, and then it just rolls on and builds that power very slow. It's definitely the slowest revving bike in my opinion in the class, even with the changes they did to the engine, which included a new bushing at the top of the rod for the piston pin to try to free up that movement a little bit, along with lighter rocker arms at the top engine, just trying to reduce the mass per se that the engine has to move. With that, the bike picks up a little bit quicker in RPMs from the mid-range on, but the initial is definitely a little bit still of a tractor as it lugs on. Map 2 doesn't really affect the initial as much for me. It just makes the RPM pick up a little bit quicker after it gets up and going. The Husqvarna does have a world spec muffler even in the US, so it's very quiet on the production side. So adding the FMF 4.1 improves the sound a little bit, gives it a little bit more of a bark and frees it up at high RPMs. But for me, I still would like to see a little more initial out of this bike. Because of the lethargic feel, yeah, it's really pliable when the conditions are slick or you're unsure because you can just grab a handful and flow through the corner. But when I want to square up really rapidly, throw it into something sandy or wheelie over braking bumps into corners, it doesn't quite have the reaction I would like. It ends up causing me to do more physical work on the bike than letting the bike naturally lift with its power. So I feel like there's some tech things I can't do on the bike that I can do with others. But at the same time, that really mellow nature of power goes very well balanced in with the chassis and suspension. Like I said, I feel like you can definitely ride this bike closer to its potential, and there is a fun factor to the speed, but I also feel like some of the excitement is just lacking. As for the triple clamps, they may look like a gimmick being split, but there's actually a really good engineering standpoint behind this to how the clamps grip the upper fork tube, especially down in the lower clamping surface. A lot of people over tighten their lower fork clamps because they don't torque it, they just go with the T-handle. When you do that, it can kind of crimp the tube down, so when the lower tube goes to pass through with the bushings, it binds up, and it can cause what some people think is mid-stroke harshness because it feels like it steps as it's trying to slide through. With this, there's a little bit more variance of the torque setting. They still recommend 12 Newton meters, and if you're able to keep it there, the other positive between the two being able to slide easier is how it acts actually in movement on the bike. When the fork, basically when you're hitting obstacles, the front end is typically getting pushed back, so when the lower tube's trying to pass through the upper tube, it's binding a little bit. With that, I felt like the mid-stroke plushness of the bike, part of it definitely had to have come from the triple clamps because they didn't make a big enough change to the setting to really affect that feeling. But I felt like compared to the production or standard FC450, this fork just overall moves in and out of the stroke much easier. So to put it bluntly, is this bike better than the production or standard FC450 per se? Yes, but in minor bits. It's not a huge home run change. I'd still like to see a lot more bark or just crispness from the engine. I would still like to see him work a little bit more on the front end initial feeling, but it's definitely a step above the standard bike. It comes with a lot of bling, a lot of cool parts that are even more than just something to look at. If you have the extra money and you want this bike per se earlier than what everybody else is gonna get for a 2020 model, yeah, sure, go out and get it. If you like more the internal changes we're talking about with the suspension or the engine, but you don't want the rest and don't want to pay the extra price tag, just wait a few months till the standard production bike comes out. You'll get those changes there, plus maybe something else. If you like the Alpinestars gear and Oakley goggles I was running in this video or any other parts and accessories, hit the link below. It'll take you to shopmoto.com. You can throw the code ML512 in at checkout. It'll save you a few dollars on your purchase and support us in the process. And while you're at it, make sure you hit the subscribe icon. It'll keep you up to date with all the videos we'll be putting out this year, from the latest motocross and off-road bike intros and plenty of shootouts to come.